At 3:17 in the morning, somewhere near the Soviet western border, a slow-moving aircraft appears on radar and is met with laughter. Just another American mistake, or so they think. 8 minutes later, the blip twists, flickers, then vanishes entirely from every Soviet screen. By the time panic erupts, radar crews are scrambling, commanders are barking orders, MiG fighters are thrown into the dark, and America's first true stealth jet has already become invisible. How did a flying triangle turn the world's mightiest air defense network inside out? And what did Soviet generals know that they dared not say aloud? The answer begins in that silent, haunted bunker. Inside the bunker, the air was heavy with cigarette smoke and the constant drone of equipment. Operators hunched over green-lit scopes, trading jokes as another blip crawled across the screen. At 3:17 in the morning, a slow-moving target appeared on the P-18 radar, drifting along at just 120 kilometers per hour and barely 300 meters above the ground. One technician snorted and called it the Ghost, an inside joke for anything that moved too slowly to be a real threat. The return was so faint, so sluggish, that several operators took turns guessing whether it was a lost weather balloon or some American drone drifting off course. The sector commander, perched above the consoles, glanced down at the plotting board but did not bother to stand. Night shifts brought their share of radar phantoms, and this one seemed no different. Laughter echoed as the blip held its course, barely inching forward. A junior operator tapped the side of the console, half mocking the machine. No one reached for the scramble phone. The P-18's display flickered with the usual clutter, ground echoes, the odd flock of birds, distant civilian traffic. But this target was steady, almost boring. Someone called out, "Maybe the Americans finally built something slower than our tractors." Routine took over. The operator adjusted the gain, switched beam modes, and watched the numbers update. The plotting board filled with pencil marks, each one tracking the slow crawl of the blip as it skirted the edge of Soviet airspace. No alarms sounded. The sector commander barely glanced at the logbook as the operator called out, "Speed 120 kilometers per hour, altitude 300 meters. Mockery was part of the ritual, a way to break the monotony of night watch. The radar network, P-18 Spoon Rest, P-19 Dunay, the distant P-14 Tall King, was considered airtight. Operators bragged that nothing crossed the border undetected, not even a stalk. The slow target on the screen only confirmed their confidence. Every so often, someone would nudge the frequency knob or tap the plotting board, but nothing changed. The blip remained, slow and steady, almost inviting more jokes. No one noticed the faint distortion at first. The laughter continued, the plotting marks grew closer together, and the bunker settled into its usual rhythm. For these men, the radar was as reliable as sunrise, and the idea of an American aircraft slipping through was as laughable as the blip itself. The confidence was absolute, the routine unbroken, until the next scan would bring something none of them expected. The routine collapsed in seconds. At 03:22, the blip on the P-18's screen began to warp, stretching into a smear before splitting in two. The technician's hand froze above the console. Someone muttered about interference, but the laughter faded. The operator twisted the gain knob, then switched frequencies. No improvement. The blip flickered, shrank, and then, without warning, vanished from the scope. A heavy silence filled the bunker. The sector commander shot upright, eyes fixed on the plotting board. "Plot it, now!" he barked, voice sharp enough to cut through the confusion. Operators scrambled, pencils scratching as they tried to mark the last known position. The plotting board filled with overlapping lines, but the trail ended in a void. Shouts erupted as the commander demanded a system check. Technicians slammed switches, recalibrated the P-18, and toggled to the P-19 Dunay and P-14 Tall King arrays. Each sweep returned nothing but static and ground clutter. "Check for jamming," someone yelled. Another operator called out, "Try beam narrow," but the frequency shift brought only more noise. The blip was gone. The commander snatched the scramble phone. "Minsk, scramble MiG-23s, Sector 4, last plot." His order echoed down the line, met by a clipped acknowledgement. Fighter crews stumbled into action, but the interceptors would be chasing a ghost. The plotting board showed only a cluster of frantic pencil marks, the trail evaporating into empty air. A technician, voice shaking, read back the log. 0325, manual plotting ordered. 0328, target lost. The commander's glare swept the room. "Keep searching, switch to manual mode. Report any anomaly." Operators cycled through every mode and frequency, but the screens remained blank. The only trace left was a fading pencil arc and a bunker full of men who now stared at their equipment with suspicion. In the logbook, the entry for 0328 was brief: signal lost. MiG-23 scrambled, no visual contact. The bunker, once filled with jokes and routine, now pulsed with alarm. Somewhere beyond the border, something had slipped past the watchful eyes of the Soviet air defense. The question hung in the air: what had they missed, and how? In Washington, the memory of Vietnam air losses still stung. Soviet radar-guided surface-to-air missiles had turned the skies over Hanoi into a graveyard for American bombers, and Pentagon planners knew the next war would be even deadlier. At the Pentagon, a classified memo circulated in late 1975 marked "For Eyes Only," warning that Soviet radar-guided surface-to-air missiles were outpacing United States countermeasures. The Air Force's own studies offered little comfort. By 1977, projections showed that traditional aircraft would suffer unacceptable losses against the expanding S-75 and S-125 missile belts stretching from Berlin to Vladivostok. Inside the halls of Congress, the idea of spending billions on a plane that looked like a jumble of flat panels drew skepticism and outright laughter. One senator waved a photo of the early hopeless Diamond model during a closed hearing, calling it a flying barn door. Critics on the Appropriations Committee demanded hard evidence, not just black and white slides and vague promises. The Air Force, worried about its own budgets, quietly questioned whether stealth was even possible outside a wind tunnel. But the threat was real, and the CIA's annual assessment only sharpened the urgency. Soviet missile batteries were multiplying across Eastern Europe, and new radar sites in Kaliningrad and Minsk could detect a B-52 at hundreds of kilometers. In a classified session, a CIA analyst pointed to a crowded map and warned, "We're running out of places to hide." DARPA's director, George Heilmeyer, refused to let the idea die. In 1976, he pressed for a special line item in the defense budget, labeled 11B, to fund a radical solution: an aircraft that would not just evade radar, but become invisible to it. The memo, dated June 1977, stated that current United States aircraft survivability against advanced Soviet air defense was unacceptable, and recommended immediate approval of 11B for low observable demonstration. A handful of intelligence officials and engineers from Lockheed's Skunk Works, led by Ben Rich, pitched the concept to a select group of lawmakers behind closed doors. They argued that no amount of jamming or speed could guarantee survival against the next generation of Soviet surface-to-air missiles. Only true invisibility would do. The debate grew heated. Some saw it as a moonshot, others as the only path forward. The final vote in the House Appropriations Subcommittee came down to a single swing member, convinced by a classified briefing that detailed how Soviet radar beams could be bent, not just dodged. The committee authorized the funding, buried deep in the black budget under line item 11B. The sum, never disclosed publicly, was enough to bankroll years of secret research, test flights, and the construction of a remote base at Groom Lake. With the money secured, the project moved from desperate theory to funded reality. The Skunk Works team got their mandate: build an aircraft that could slip through the densest radar net in history. The race to make the invisible real had begun, shielded by secrecy and driven by the knowledge that the next generation of American pilots might not survive without it. The desert sun beat down on the remote airstrip at Groom Lake, where the Skunk Works team unloaded their creation under a cloak of secrecy. The prototype, nicknamed Hopeless Diamond, looked nothing like a fighter jet, just a jumble of sharp angles and flat plates painted black and bristling with sensors. Even among engineers, skepticism ran deep. Some thought it would never get off the ground, let alone survive against real-world threats. But Ben Rich, now leading Skunk Works after Kelly Johnson, pressed forward. He trusted the math, trusted his people, and pushed for results the Pentagon could not ignore. Test flights began in December 1977. The first time Have Blue lifted off, the chase plane pilot radioed that it looked like it should not fly. But it does. Every movement was monitored, every vibration logged. The air was tense inside the control van as engineers watched the radar cross-section readings come in from the White Sands test range. On the screens, the return from Have Blue was almost invisible. Where a normal fighter reflected a strong, bright signal, this odd-shaped jet barely registered, a tiny blip no bigger than a golf ball. The radar cross-section data stunned even the most optimistic on the team. One engineer whispered that they had done it. They could not be seen. Ben Rich kept the pressure on. Each test flight pushed the limits, higher speeds, sharper turns, and lower altitudes. The Have Blue prototype proved the breakthrough theory that angular surfaces, carefully calculated, sent radar waves scattering harmlessly in all directions. Engineers layered on radar-absorbent coatings, fine-tuned the sawtooth panel edges, and sealed every seam. Maintenance crews learned to treat the paint like gold. Even a chipped edge could spike the radar signature, so every inch was checked and checked again. Inside Skunk Works, the culture was relentless. Secrecy ruled everything. Engineers worked in windowless rooms, using code names and shredding every note at the end of each shift. Only a handful of people saw the full picture. Some days, the pressure boiled over in arguments about flight control software or the latest radar cross-section anomaly. But the breakthroughs kept coming. By the spring of 1978, the Have Blue program had delivered something no one else in the world could match. A jet that radar barely noticed even when it was flying straight at the transmitter. Word filtered back to Washington through classified briefings. The test results were clear. Hopeless Diamond had become the world's first truly stealthy aircraft. Congressional skeptics who had laughed at the early models now wanted production numbers. The Air Force, once wary, began drafting requirements for an operational attack jet based on the prototype's success. The Skunk Works team moved quickly, shifting from experimental flights to designing the full-scale F-117. Every lesson from Have Blue, every radar cross-section measurement, every maintenance quirk, every late-night fix went straight into the new jet's blueprints. Groom Lake became a proving ground for the impossible. Engineers and pilots worked side by side, testing new coatings, refining flight controls, and logging thousands of hours in the dark. The project's secrecy was matched only by its ambition. No one outside the barbed wire fences knew that in the Nevada desert, American engineers had just rewritten the rules of air combat. The Skunk Works had taken a wild theory and turned it into a weapon that would haunt enemy radar screens for decades to come. The F-117's silhouette defied every expectation of what a jet should look like. Instead of graceful curves and swept wings, its skin was all sharp angles, dozens of flat interlocking panels set at precise orientations. The wings sloped back at about 50 degrees, and even the canopy was faceted, breaking up smooth surfaces into a patchwork of triangles and trapezoids. Every seam, every edge, and every panel line was calculated to redirect radar waves away from their source. Where a conventional fighter bounced energy straight back to a radar dish, the Nighthawk scattered it like sunlight off a shattered mirror. This approach relied on a simple but powerful principle. Radar waves reflect off flat surfaces at the same angle they arrive. By arranging the aircraft's facets so that none faced directly toward a radar transmitter, engineers ensured that incoming signals would be flung out into empty sky, not back to waiting Soviet operators. The result was visible in polar radar cross-section diagrams. A conventional jet showed a wide, bright return from almost any angle, but the F-117 signature was reduced to a few narrow spikes, and even those could be minimized by careful flight planning. Faceting alone was not enough. The Skunk Works team developed a special skin, a radar-absorbent material that coated every inch of the exterior. This was not just paint. The coating was a composite blend, packed with tiny particles of iron oxide and carbon suspended in a polymer matrix. When radar waves struck the surface, the particles absorbed and converted much of the energy into heat, bleeding it away before it could reflect. The effect was exponential. Each millimeter of radar-absorbent material cut the signal down even further, especially at the higher frequencies used by Soviet fire control radars. But the radar-absorbent material came with its own headaches. The coating was delicate and required constant attention. Even a chipped edge or a patch of worn skin could spike the jet's radar signature, undoing months of careful engineering. Maintenance crews at Groom Lake and Tonopah spent hours inspecting every panel, using special tools to measure thickness and check for invisible cracks. The process was so precise that a stray screwdriver or a single misplaced boot print could mean stripping and recoating an entire section of wing. Every opening on the aircraft, bomb bay doors, landing gear covers, refueling ports, was shaped with saw-toothed edges. These zigzags broke up straight lines that would otherwise reflect radar energy, turning potential weak spots into part of the stealth system. Even the F-117's navigation lights were recessed and shielded, hidden behind angled baffles to prevent stray reflections. The payoff was astonishing. On radar, the F-117's return shrank to the size of a small bird, or sometimes nothing at all. Soviet operators accustomed to tracking targets with cross-sections measured in square meters now faced an aircraft with a signature as small as a marble. This was not just theory. Test flights over the White Sands range confirmed it. Engineers watched as powerful tracking radars, the same types exported to Warsaw Pact allies, struggled to hold a lock on the prototype. The radar cross-section dropped by orders of magnitude. Where a MiG or a B-52 would light up the screens, the Nighthawk left only a faint flickering trace, if anything at all. The combination of faceted geometry and a radar-absorbent skin formed the heart of the F-117's invisibility. It was a system that demanded discipline, precision, and constant vigilance. For the engineers and pilots who trusted their lives to it, the payoff was clear. The world's most advanced air defenses could be defeated not with brute force, but with the quiet power of physics and a new way of thinking about shape and skin. Weapons on the F-117 Nighthawk never hung from pylons or cluttered its sleek lines. Every bomb, missile, and targeting sensor rode inside the aircraft, hidden behind doors cut with jagged saw-tooth edges. Engineers shaped these doors not for looks, but to break up radar reflections that would betray the jet's position the moment they opened. Even the landing gear covers and refueling ports followed the same zigzag pattern, turning every potential weak spot into another layer of invisibility. The choice to carry weapons internally was not just about radar. It forced a strict limit on payload and weapon size. The F-117's main strike weapon was the GBU-27 Paveway 3, a 2,000-pound laser-guided bomb designed to hit hardened targets with pinpoint accuracy. On some missions, pilots loaded AGM-65 Maverick or AGM-88 HARM missiles, but always within the confines of the bay. This meant no extra fuel tanks, no air-to-air missiles, and no room for error. Every mission profile was built around the idea that what could not be seen could not be shot down. Managing heat was just as important as hiding from radar. The Nighthawk's engines were a pair of non-afterburning General Electric F-404 engines, each produced about 10,800 pounds of thrust. Unlike fighters that relied on afterburners for speed, the Nighthawk's engines ran cool and quiet. Afterburners would have turned the aircraft into a beacon for heat-seeking missiles, a risk the designers refused to take. Instead, the exhaust was flattened into wide, thin slots at the back of the fuselage. This forced hot gases to mix rapidly with cold outside air, lowering the temperature and making the jet's heat signature harder to spot. The tail fins, canted outward, shielded the hottest part of the exhaust from ground-based sensors. Even the exhaust slots themselves were shaped to scatter radar waves, not just hide heat. Air intakes on the Nighthawk were another study in compromise. Instead of the gaping round mouths seen on other jets, the F-117's intakes were rectangular, covered with fine mesh screens coated in radar-absorbent material. These screens blocked radar from bouncing off the spinning turbine blades inside, one of the most reflective parts of any jet engine. At the same time, the intakes had to deliver enough air for the engines to breathe, without increasing the aircraft's radar cross-section. Every inch of ductwork was tuned to keep the jet invisible, even if it meant sacrificing a bit of performance. All these features, internal weapons, cool exhaust, shielded intakes, came at a price. The F-117 was unstable by design. Its sharp angles and short wings made it impossible to fly by hand. The solution was a digital fly-by-wire system, borrowed and adapted from the F-16. Computers made constant, tiny corrections to the control surfaces, keeping the jet level and responsive. The system was so critical that pilots joked about being along for the ride, trusting the software to keep them aloft. Without fly-by-wire, the Nighthawk would have been uncontrollable, its stealth geometry turning every flight into a wrestling match with physics. The synergy between these systems created a new kind of warplane, one that could deliver precision strikes under the enemy's nose and vanish before anyone could react. But the same features that made the F-117 invisible to radar also made it uniquely dependent on its internal systems and careful piloting. Each mission demanded discipline and precision, not just from the aircraft, but from the people who flew and maintained it. The Nighthawk's toolkit was complete: shape, skin, hidden weapons, cool exhaust, and a brain of wires and code, all working together to keep it unseen. Radar engineers in the Soviet Union spent years refining their early warning networks, convinced that no aircraft could slip past the overlapping fields of the P-18 Spoon Rest, P-19 Dunay, and P-14 Tall King arrays. Yet beneath the surface, the physics of detection exposed vulnerabilities no amount of vigilance could close. The P-14, with its massive, very high-frequency array, boasted a range that stretched over 200 nautical miles, but its angular resolution, limited to about 2 degrees, meant a small object could hide in plain sight, its position blurred across kilometers of sky. The P-18 and P-19, operating in the ultra-high frequency band and the S-band, offered sharper focus, but were tuned for targets with radar cross-sections measured in square meters, not the marble-sized signature of a stealth jet. The real weakness lay in the moving target indicator circuits. Designed to filter out ground clutter and stationary echoes, the moving target indicator compared each pulse with the last, discarding anything that did not move fast enough to stand out from the background. But the moving target indicator had blind velocities, specific speeds where a moving object could vanish, its signal cancelled by the very filter meant to reveal it. An F-117 flying at just the right speed could slip into this notch, its faint return erased before an operator ever saw it. Low signal-to-noise ratio brought another problem. Soviet radars, overwhelmed by clutter and atmospheric noise, set automatic thresholds to ignore weak or intermittent returns. The F-117's faceted skin and radar-absorbent coating cut its signature so drastically that its blip often fell below these thresholds, dismissed as a glitch or a stray bird. Even when a return appeared, the manual plotting system, relying on operators to mark positions every few seconds, introduced critical delays. By the time a technician finished drawing a line, the target might already be gone, lost in the noise, or filtered out by the next sweep. Soviet engineers understood these limitations in theory, but the bunker's confidence depended on faith in the system. The physics behind the screens quietly set the rules, and the F-117's design exploited every loophole. The radar network's strengths, power, range, and filtering became the very gaps that a stealth jet could walk through, unseen and unchallenged. Lieutenant Colonel Al Whitley sat in the cockpit, surrounded by dark, the only light coming from the green glow of his instruments. The mission profile called for subsonic ingress, barely 600 kilometers an hour, hugging the terrain below radar coverage, every move calculated to stay invisible. The F-117's faceted skin and black ram coating worked in silence, scattering hostile radar waves into empty sky. Inside the jet, there was no radar to betray his position, only the hum of the fly-by-wire system and the constant updates from his inertial navigation unit. Greg Feast, another pilot trusted with the Nighthawk, recalled the eerie calm of night missions over Europe. With no jamming support and no fighter escort, he flew alone, relying on the forward-looking infrared FLIR display to pick out rivers and landmarks. The cockpit was sealed tight, every switch and display shielded from stray reflections. Mission planners had mapped the route to thread through radar gaps and along valleys, but the real protection came from the jet's near-invisible signature. Soviet radars might show a flicker, a ghost, but nothing to cue a missile battery or to scramble an interceptor. Every strike demanded precision. The GBU-27 Paveway 3, a 2,000-pound laser-guided bomb, rode inside the internal bay. At the target, Alton Whitley would roll in, open the bomb doors for just a few seconds, jagged edges breaking up any radar return, then release the weapon. The FLIR pod painted the aim point with a laser, guiding the bomb to a pinpoint impact. In debriefs, pilots described the surreal experience, watching explosions bloom on the ground while their own aircraft remained undetected, not a single warning light flashing. After the release, the bay doors snapped shut and the Nighthawk banked away, still hugging the dark. Soviet radar screens, moments earlier alive with static and clutter, showed nothing. The pilots trusted their training and the jet's design, knowing that even as they crossed borders and returned to base, the only trace left behind was a fading echo, if that. For Whitley, Feast, and their fellow pilots, the night belonged to the unseen. In a secure briefing room beneath layers of concrete, a senior commander from the Soviet Air Defense Forces studied a fresh assessment stamped with the year 1990. The document, translated and circulated among the highest ranks, spelled out what the night's confusion in the bunker had only hinted at. It stated without qualification that the existing radar network P-14 Tall King, P-18 Spoon Rest, P-19 Dunay could not reliably detect or target the new American aircraft. A line in black ink was underlined for emphasis. It read, "Cannot reliably detect or target low observable aircraft in operational conditions." The citation, report number 28790, left little room for doubt. The commander's hands rested on the table, knuckles pale against the paper. He did not speak for a long time. Around him, staff officers waited, some shifting in their seats, others staring at the floor. The air was heavy with the realization that the faith placed in their radar screens had been misplaced. For years, the Soviet air defense forces had trusted overlapping coverage, the power of VHF arrays, and the discipline of their operators. Now the evidence was undeniable. The F-117 Nighthawk had crossed their borders and vanished, not through jamming or electronic trickery, but by exploiting the very physics their systems relied on. The jet scattered signals like dust in the wind. He read the summary again, voice steady but quiet. Our current detection probability against low observable targets is insufficient for engagement. Tracking is intermittent. Targeting is not possible. The admission hung in the room, a verdict delivered after decades of investment and doctrine. No amount of recalibration, no frantic switching of frequencies could close the gap. The world's most advanced radar network had been outmaneuvered by a jet that scattered signals and refused to be seen. As the meeting ended, the commander gathered the report and left without another word. The era of certainty in Soviet air defense was over. On paper and in practice, the advantage now belonged to those who could disappear. Invisible jets are no longer just Cold War legend. They now define modern air power. Today, nearly 40 nations race to counter stealth, pouring billions into new sensors, AI-driven detection, and hypersonic weapons. But every breakthrough shifts the balance again. The lesson endures. In the battle between detection and deception, certainty is always one innovation away. What do you think? Does invisibility guarantee security, or is it just a new kind of arms race? Share your thoughts below.